The announcement of a synchronized Pangong disengagement is a relief. The India-China disengagement comes at a time when tension between two nuclear-armed nations has been threatening peace in the region. The source of this tension is an ill-defined 3,440-kilometer-long disputed border along the line of actual control. The frontier is lined by rivers, lakes, snowcaps that make the line shift, bringing soldiers face-to-face at many points, sparking a confrontation. The two nations have also been competing to build infrastructure along the line of actual control. In June 2020, the construction of a new road to a high-altitude airbase by India was seen as one of the main triggers for a clash between the troops. It took place in the Galwan River Valley in Ladakh, a disputed Himalayan border region, leaving at least 20 Indian soldiers dead. With no definite solution in sight, the two nations will have to sit across tables and discuss the issue amicably. This disengagement is just a bandage and not a permanent solution to the problem between India and China. Richa Sarod Dalal, Democracy News Live, New Delhi.
Good morning, I'm Rohit Gandhi and you're watching Democracy News Live. Welcome to our show, It Matters. Today, we're discussing the Pangong Soy disengagement. India and China have finally reached a disengagement pact in the Pangong lake areas in Ladakh. India's Defense Minister Rajnath Singh said that the Chinese army will pull back its troops to east of Finger 8, areas in the northern bank of Pangong Lake, and Indian troops will be based at their permanent location, Dhansing Thapa Post near Finger 3. Senior Colonel Wu Xian, spokesperson for the Chinese Military of Defense, said that this move is in accordance with the consensus reached by both sides at the 9th round of the China-India Corps Commander level meeting. The step has been taken to restore peace between the two nations. What we need to remember is that the Chinese may be disengaging from Ladakh areas, but the competition between the two Asian giants goes beyond this area. The battle extends in the areas of economics, nuclear, access to Central Asia, Europe. In the seas, the battle was exacerbated by the American Republican President Donald Trump as he helped push India on the war path with China. In order to achieve growth, one needs peace. A fighting India and China will keep US on top. But with Trump ousted and his grand plans for a global military turmoil receding, now India and China are left to their own devices. But once the fighting begins, it is hard for it to finish that easily. There are lots of egos that come in play. Let's discuss this positive move on the disengagement. Today we're joined on our show by three guests. Our first guest is Major General Harsha Kakkar. He's a veteran and a security analyst. Our second guest, Dr. Vijay Sakhuja. He's the former director of National Maritime Foundation, New Delhi. We also have with us Paras Ratna. He's an independent research consultant who specializes in Indian foreign policy. Let me start with Mr. Sakhuja. Mr. Sakhuja, explain to me where and how do we stand here today? What has happened? What are the changes on the ground as we see today?
Thank you. I think I would pitch the entire proactive move as a very promising move. I think there is a success story. If one was to look at the success story, it's a continuum of political, diplomatic, strategic, and even tactical at the military level. I think both sides have shown maturity, and it's a promising move. But in the same breath, while I would say it is a promising move, I must confess and say it doesn't let the challenges go away. They remain. They are persistent, and it's not something that should be taken as very lightly in the form that, of course, there is a euphoria attached to it. That is a thing we get to hear a lot about it. But the challenges come in the form of, while there'll be a disengagement, challenges remain at sea. It's something that we have to really look at very, very carefully. Chinese forays for the last 2 decades and a half, and I've noticed that very, very carefully, have been, they move just to come in goodwill visits, piracy, counter-piracy. Now that the pirates have gone home, they're still there. So Chinese agenda, for that matter, in terms of going beyond their waters or going beyond the boundaries, if I may suggest, are well defined, and we will have to keep those in mind. I must also also add that while the it was localized, I think the tensions which happen at sea on land, they have their reverberations, or the waves are felt at sea, and those are very, very clearly visible as of now. At this very moment, we have a series of exercises which are going on with the Pakistan Navy. There are about 45 navies who have gathered in the North Arabian Sea, and those are the things we have to watch out for. While it is localized and it's a good move, both sides maturity has been shown, but I think challenges will remain.
Engagement unfolding as we speak, because the day you disengage in one area and you begin an engagement in another. So we'll come back to discuss this. Let me bring in General Kakkar here. General Kakkar, would you explain to me, first of all, what has been the decision for the audience to understand what really has happened? Is it just the Pangong So Lake area where the disengagement has happened, or is it even in the Galwan areas where India lost its troops, and as many have said, including I saw a Russian agency wire, that even the Chinese lost troops?
Currently, what the RM announced is that the initial disengagement is going to take place in the Pangong So Lake, north and south. Now, there was certain amount of a little bit of ambiguity in what he said and the way I would understand it. As far as the south of Pangong So is concerned, it's very clear that the armor and artillery elements, or the heavy elements, are going to pull back first. As far as north of the Pangong So is concerned, as you had brought out, the Chinese would go back to their traditional post, which is east of Finger 8, from where they were patrolling till they set up a post at Finger 4. We will go back to our traditional post at Finger 3, just a bit ahead of Finger 3, which is the Dancing Thapa post. There will be any structures which have come up between April last year and now are going to be dismantled. And when the troops pull back, the area will be back to normal. There's going to be no patrolling in between till they finally come out. Possibly they're going to come out with some rules and regulations, maybe on days of patrolling or times of patrolling, to prevent any clashes. That appears to be still to come through. There is also a report which is not very clear whether we're going to vacate Kailash Ridge possibly after the entire armor and everything else in the north and the south takes place, or that may continue remaining with us as a hold till the time the two other issues, which is basically Gogra Post and Hot Springs, are concerned, where Galwan was. There is also a mention somewhere that in these two areas, though the discussion is to take place, and the distance between the two forces is about 1 kilometer, it may go up to 2 to 4 kilometers depending on the area, to prevent any clash, and the gap in between will remain a no patrolling zone. Depsang is the only thing which has not been covered, because Depsang predates the incident of April 2020. So Depsang is likely to come up at a last stage. Now, this is where things currently stand. How is the pullback going to go through? What is going to be the level of monitoring which is going to be done at the ground level there? The commanders are going to be in touch. We're not going to look at any repeat of Galwan. There's going to be monitoring through satellite, through UAVs, and then finally possibly through joint patrols, or in whichever form the local commanders decide. The trust deficit that has come in is going to make the process a little bit slow, a verification taking a little bit more time, and the pulling back, because after all, the final pullback, it appears to be that we may continue holding on to Rezangla and one or two more posts along the Kailash Ridge till about as late as possible, possibly till we've cleared up Gogra Post and Hot Springs, but possibly before Depsang, because Depsang has been predating this. But as far the reports that come in from the army say, they're not very concerned about Depsang, because the quantum of forces that they've got there and the quantum of forces that the Chinese have got, there's not a major level of concern. But this is how the current scenario appears to be. The videos are out of the initial armor withdrawal, because you see the armor located about 200 meters apart was actually a flashpoint. So that is the first that they want to cause, increase the gap so that that doesn't remain a flashpoint.
I think it's a very very positive move. So as we see it, um, the what we also realize over the years, and I've had this discussion many times with the Pakistanis as well, is that if your points are marked, they are marked on a GPS, and then you retract from those places, you can maintain peace. The same thing in Siachen as well. You continue to have these fluid locations on east of this and west of that and 200 meters of this. The GPS points are certainly a good referral point. The Pakistanis didn't want to retract, for example, from Siachen, in 2006 when they came for discussions on the table, and they weren't willing to mark these points properly, and it becomes a large issue. What many of these Asian countries don't realize is growth does not happen when you don't have peace. Nobody in the international investors invests. Nobody trusts that you will maintain peace so that you can at least have the growth in the economy that people are deserving. And this is what's missing for their real basic understanding. First, find peace, and 200 meters of border here and there is not going to change that. Let me bring in Paras here into this mix. Paras, explain to me from an Indian foreign policy perspective, what kind of a move is this? How do you look at it from an Indian foreign policy perspective? I don't hear Paras. I think we don't have him there. Let's go back to Mr. Sakuja. Sakuja, when you see the new changes that are happening in the ocean region, when you see that we have a whole challenge unfolding in the Arabian Sea, Strait of Hormuz, South China Sea, and it just happens as we are beginning to disengage, as India and China begin to disengage. How do you see this unfolding? Do you think China will move this whole war to another front so that people stop talking about it and then come back to the line of actual control sometime soon?
Yeah, I guess, this is one, let's look at localized way of the tensions between India and China, but the reverberations of this have been felt across the entire region, rather the Indo-Pacific region, which is the flavor of the time, which combines the two oceans, the Pacific Ocean and the Indian Ocean. So the Chinese, military modernization, in particular, the naval modernization has sent out uncomfortable waves across the entire region. They are talking about a ship, almost about a 400 ship navy. As a matter of fact, as of this moment, if one was to look at the force structure, they are ahead of the Americans, who would one day, a few days ago, they would be the largest holders of such a large navy. But today we are talking about the PLA Navy being the largest. Now, as a matter of fact, if one looks at it, China may have drawn a leaf out of what it was doing in the South China Sea, salami slicing. And here we notice some shades of those appearing as far as the Himalayan border is concerned, and also creeping assertiveness has been the feature of the Chinese in the South China Sea. If one were to stretch this from the Pacific into the Indian Ocean, they've been into the Indian Ocean for several decades, as I said, almost about 25 years for various reasons. But what is promising about them is what they think is promising about them, they've been able to push out the Belt Road Initiative. As a matter of fact, we find them dotting the entire Indian Ocean region with one would assume them turning from access facilities today to bases which will support military operations. They have now a base in Djibouti. They're going to be using it for the purpose of building up their own sphere of influence. They're now joined in by Russia. Turkey is coming in. So you find that the Indian Ocean is going to be what would be terming as a more of a peaceful, rather laid back in terms of countering non-traditional security threats and challenges such as piracy, terrorism. I think we are going to see a realist paradigm shift in here. There'll be great park contestation which will come in. And for that matter, I must quickly recall what you said, peace. If it is going to be peace that we are looking for, and we assume that the Chinese would have also thought about peace in terms of to settle the border. After all, their borders, their coastal areas, or for that matter, the East Coast is right now very, very alive, very much alive. The U.S. Navy 2 days ago carried out for the third successive time two carrier operations. Now, these are the issues which they are there. They lurk at the back of their mind. And I'm sure one of the triggers that the Chinese did think in terms of disengagement along the border could have been over there. Great power engagements are going to be, of course, they are a great power themselves. They're going to be engaged with the as a important actor, as a rising power. They have the Americans have a challenger. Then the new element which has come in is about Taiwan. Now, Taiwan is going to be an important factor in the entire discourse of how Chinese are going to be managing their borders, whether it's on land or at sea. So these are the issues which will be looming large. And I guess if the peace is to be obtained, I think Chinese will have to come out much more cleaner, clearer in terms of what their intentions are. Is it for development? They want to spread their culture, the Chinese influence, whether it is soft power or it is going to be military hard power. If it is going to be military hard power, I'm afraid we're going to have they're going to have a number of challenges, including those coming from India.
And I think, Dr. Sugiri, you make a very, very good point. When we actually see the challenges for India, for example, we see challenges on the Pakistani end, we see some challenges on the Chinese end, we also see some challenges now coming on the Nepal end. But when we begin seeing at China, it also has large problems. Its problems are not just based on its land borders with India, but it has larger issues on where it's trying to establish itself in Africa. You mentioned, the pearl of strings, the string of pearls around in the Indian Ocean region, where in Sri Lanka it's establishing itself on the edges of outside the Indian Ocean to make sure it encircles India in some way. Because there are two places which are critical for global trade. One is the Strait of Hormuz and the other one is the Strait of Malacca. Now these two straits, if they get blocked in any way, or there's a battle which takes place between on these two areas, the Chinese continue to create a route to access Central Asia and Europe through this Belt Road Initiative. And that has been one of the big challenges. So China continues to concentrate on creating two levels of access routes, one through Russia and one straight through the Belt Road Initiative, which goes through Afghanistan and Iran. Now, those are things that everybody needs to consider, and Chinese really need to make a decision on who they want to be. I think if they continue on the path of trying to, usurp to global trade, then it will certainly have a pushback from India, even though in this particular session, they may have backed down and they would have said, all right, we're finding peace. But overall, if they continue on that whole path, then the rest of the world is going to push back. General Kakkar, do you see the Chinese now agreeing for peace going forward, or do you think they will continue being the military power that they're showcasing themselves as?
Possibly about 2 years ago, or 2 to 3 years ago, when the same leadership was there on both sides. And I did come across a sentence somewhere where Xi Jinping said, let's leave the border issue to the next generation. So it appears in the overall context, I would say that this is a pause. Whether the pause would go for 2 decades, 3 decades, 1 decade is an issue which we've got to realize. Because the Chinese are never in a rush to resolve the border issue. Amongst the proposals that India has put forward is those regions where there is no dispute, let's close those areas, let's exchange maps, let's mark the LAC. But that has not been accepted. In their proposal, it is across the board. And where there is a dispute, they're willing to let it linger because that is the means where they get to apply pressure. But as far as India is concerned, it's been not one after 62, whether it was Nathula, whether it's been now, it's always wherever there has been a violent standoff or there has been something beyond the normal, the Indian armed forces have stood through. And that has possibly also conveyed a message that India is not a pushover. And India has the power, India has the global backing, India has the capability to challenge the Chinese. When we look at it, even in the Indian Ocean region, after all, we are operating from our home bases. He's operating from 3,000 kilometers. To maintain your lines of communication, despite having bases, unless you have a base like Guam or Diego Garcia or something like that, it's not easy. But that's one part. The other fact is that the Chinese are in no rush for a resolution. Ideally, I would have considered it to be a very logical thought process if the Chinese would have decided to resolve the border issue, possibly on the status at which we are now coming down to, thereby ensuring that it secures its Karakoram highway and the CPEC, which is one of its major concerns. I only hope, I may be absolutely wrong, but I do hope that the recent offer for talks from Pakistan, from both the army chief and the prime minister, it wouldn't have come off the cuff. It would have had some amount of Chinese thought process behind it. I hope, or I possibly presume, if it's had some sort of Chinese backing behind it, then is it the commencement of a three-way dialogue? That is, India, Pak, resolve J&K, or you begin talks, thereby the peace starts setting in there. China, India now going in for a border resolution. Are you looking at coming down to a resolution which secures the China Pak economic corridor, which for them today is their largest investment anywhere globally? And this is something which they're desperate to protect, and which is why we keep talking of Dapsang being a major region. So, is there something that is working out here? Let's see, possibly in the next few months, something may roll out.
Right. And also, one of the challenges around this whole process of engagement, I remember there was a time India said the line of control with Pakistan would be an okay solution. But, you know, Pakistan thought it could continue keep pushing, but India obviously changed its stand. Today, India may be agreeable to freeze the line here, but tomorrow, as India continues to grow and develop, because India is in that trajectory, India may change its stand. So, China securing some of its land routes to Central Asia and Europe, maybe this may be a good time for them. But again, at the same time, if they had that kind of communication power, if they had the kind of communication strategy, it would be a much better scenario. Dr. Sakuja, can I get some closing remarks from you in terms of what do you think needs to be the next step forward for India's perspective? What does India need to do to be able to continue pushing the Chinese, because it's not going to be an easy process, I realize. And what should, in an ideal world, the Chinese do to bring peace?
I think, let's give the onus. Of course, both sides do agree to, disengage. That's onus is on both the sides to really take the process forward. But I would venture in the same breath to suggest that I think there is a dialogue, the maritime confidence building measures, a dialogue which started several years ago, which is lying low, gathering dust somewhere. I think it's time to revive that, to look into it. I think that will be one of the important triggers for both sides to now start looking at how they can, come together and explore. After all, Chinese would like to. They have a very well defined concept called as delivering public goods at sea. We have lots of issues at sea in terms of environment, ecology, search and rescue. Variety of things are there. I think there's an opportunity for both sides to now pull that out from the file that it is there and start looking at it. We already have a good example of both sides working together in the Gulf of Aden. There was the International Transit Corridor, which was led by China, India, Japan, and Korea, who would escort ships. There is already a model available. I think it's opportunity for them. But Chinese would have to be a little more transparent, particularly in the context of what kind of infrastructure that they're building, what is the purpose. They have to come clean. They'll have to dispel the entire notion that has been built up, and logically for good reasons, is about this debt trap. And so that both sides can now talk in terms of bringing about, say, prosperity to the region, to the Asian region. After all, we have a long history of civilizational history. Our mariners had traveled all the way to China, and Chinese Buddhist monks had come down here to the sea route. I think we are recalling, in fact, I would sum it up to say we are into the 21st century. We are recalling the ancient glory, is the Asian civilization. And both sides have a responsibility to the international community, to the global humanity, to come together, recall the prosperity that they were built around in the ancient times, and recall that and try to build up confidence. There will be problems. It's not so easy. Sovereignty is fundamental to both the countries. There are boundary issues. I think how far we can cool these borders, look at how we can build up infrastructure that is meant for a collective good to deliver public goods at sea for the international community.
Closing statements, General Kakkar, if you can weigh in terms of what do you think should be the next step forwards militarily for India, and if you were to advise the Chinese tomorrow and say, what would make and bring peace to the region?
As far as India is concerned, let me say that the government should not take this pause which has been set in and go lax again on defense infrastructure development or defense capability build-up. You've got to realize that the border infrastructure defense capability should be an ongoing process. This may just be a pause. And we've got to utilize this pause well to ensure that we start closing the capability gap with the Chinese. As far as the armed forces are concerned, they're currently undergoing the largest restructuring in terms of creation of theater commands, enhancing joint operations since the last almost 70 years. I think it's time that this continues with equal focus, and let's push through so that in case anything else reoccurs with the Chinese, we're all set and prepared to operate as joint forces. As far as the Chinese are concerned, the main thought is that you've got to realize that everywhere you push, you don't succeed. You've got to realize that there are forces that are capable of holding you back. And there are forces that have got far better war and operational experience than a conscript force that comes in from your side. You've got to realize that in case there are going to be operations, they're going to be heavy cost. So let's look at it in terms of resolving the issue. Let's look at it in terms of development. Let's look at it in terms of the economies of both nations going up, rather than wasting our energies fighting for a few square kilometers of land which are not going to give any benefit to you. So let's look at it in terms of growing forward together rather than going backwards.
Well spoken, General Kakkar, honestly, and if you actually get down to the point of the militaries of these civilized nations are meant for bringing peace. They aren't meant for bringing more war. And if a global community realizes that its journey is going to be more peaceful, the civilizations are going to develop, we will fight disease together, we will continue, getting food to people's tables, giving them shelter, providing them energy to produce a better world, a far more greener world. Possibly that's the way forward. It's a regressive approach to look at military being your main tenet. It may be the tenet for some countries who are still looking at a more backward existence, but if you're a progressive nation, you would look for peace, you would look for prosperity of not just yourself, but the world. Thanks for watching It Matters. General Kakkar, Dr. Sakhuja, thank you for joining me for this show. I think it's an important show, and we need to continue making sure that the peace in the Asian region sustains. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.